Welcome to the Colony Archive, a weekly review and analysis on the politics of empire and resistance. Here we talk about current events in their historical context. The Colony Archive is a critical conversation between those who want to forge alternative perspectives on history, politics, and the truth. Recently, we saw Joe Biden hold the book of Rashid Khalidi, The 100 Years' War on Palestine, as he left the bookstore. It is not clear why he was holding this book, especially upside down. And the mainstream media attacked Biden, saying that he was holding an anti-Israeli book. Ismail Khalidi, the author's son, wrote on X addressing Biden that "Get my father's book out of your blood-soaked hand, you genocidal maniac." Although I would personally encourage Biden to read the book, given Biden's nearly unconditional support for Israel, Ismail Khalidi's reaction is understandable. Biden should read the book to learn about the concept of settler colonialism. We hear the concept of settler colonialism in relation to Israeli practices in the Palestinian territories. But how is it exactly that Israel is a settler colonial state? In order to understand this, we have to grasp two other related terms, namely colonialism and imperialism. These two terms are often used interchangeably, but they don't mean exactly the same thing. Palestinian-American scholar and literary critic Edward Said distinguished these two terms in his 1993 book, Culture and Imperialism. He pinpointed the distinction in a lecture he delivered in the same year at York University.
Imperialism means the practice, the theory, and the attitudes of a dominating metropolitan center that rules a distant territory. Colonialism, which is almost always a consequence of imperialism, is the implanting of settlements on distant territory. As the historian Michael Doyle puts it, empire is a relationship, formal or informal, in which one state controls the effective political sovereignty of another political society. It can be achieved by force, by political collaboration, by economic, social, or cultural dependence. Imperialism, Doyle continues, is simply the process or policy of establishing or maintaining an empire. In our time, direct colonialism of the kind, for example, the British in India or the French in Algeria and Morocco, direct colonialism has largely ended. Yet imperialism lingers where it often has been, in a kind of general cultural sphere, as well as in specific political, ideological, economic, and social practices.
Following Said's argument, we can view colonialism as when one country establishes trade posts and settlements in another called a colony, and once this rule solidifies, it applies repression to protect this interest. A major example was the British colonization of India. It began as a trade enterprise in 1600 through the so-called East India Company.
Established over 400 years ago, the East India Company, from its headquarters on Leadenhall Street, would rise from humble beginnings as a trading company for voyages to India, to effectively becoming the de facto state government of the entire subcontinent.
By the 18th and 19th centuries, the British, both the agents of the Crown and Company, were applying regular repression to conquer, control, and crush the Indian population, including the management of revolts against British colonial rule. We should also consider how the metropole is built up. This means that the largest cities of the colonialist country extract the natural and human resources of the colony. These resources are then transferred over to the metropole for manufacturing and labor. Imperialism, in contrast, is the more indirect exercise of control over the economy and culture of the colonized land from the metropole. And here lies the distinction. Colonialism involves an actual discernible presence in the form of settlements, colonial administration, and armed forces, while imperialism is indirect and less notorious. This is why imperialism continued to extend its tentacles even long after traditional European colonialism had declined. So for instance, when African nations gained their independence from France, and when the French settlements were gone, this did not mean that French imperialism and their exploitation of Africa had come to an end. In fact, you could argue that it continues into the present day. This is why the Sahel states of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso are now taking a position against France.
Ce conflit que nous qualifions que autre chose que la manifestation violente, barbare de l'impérialisme, du néocolonialisme, de l'esclavage qu'on tend à nous imposer aujourd'hui, ce que nous avons qualifié terrorisme.
On this map, you can see what is today's Burkina Faso was under direct French colonial rule. You also see the rest of Asia and Africa in 1900. The countries in light brown, including Afghanistan, Iran, and the Ottoman Empire, and also Ethiopia, were not colonized, but they were still affected by imperialism. These countries in other colors, however, were colonized by European powers, especially by Britain and France. Although colonialism and imperialism are related and one could follow another, there is still a distinction to be made. Colonialism is the more direct and visible presence, while imperialism is indirect and, well, we could say, more hidden. This is why the term settler comes with colonialism and not with imperialism. So we say settler colonialism, but we do not say settler imperialism. Colonizers have a direct and visible presence in the colony. Rashid Khalidi describes Israeli practices in the Palestinian territories as settler colonialism. This is because Israel dispossesses Palestinians of their ancestral land through legal and extra-legal means, including violence, and then allows for the making of and expansion of settlements. In this way, the immigrant settlers are accommodated while the native population is expelled from the land. When colonizers wanted a land, all of a sudden, the land becomes a land without a people. This happened in North America, Australia, and New Zealand, and now Israel.
The slogan, "A land without a people for a people without a land," has often been used to justify the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. It suggests that Palestine was largely uninhabited or barren before Jewish settlement. But historical records and evidence tell a different story. During the late Ottoman and British Mandate periods, Palestine was home to thriving communities of Arabs, both Muslim and Christian, as well as Jews. The cities of Jerusalem, Jaffa, Haifa, and Nablus were bustling centers of commerce and culture. The land itself was far from barren. Agricultural communities cultivated the land, and traders conducted business in bustling markets. This was not a wasteland, but a region.
Jared Kushner seemed to really believe in the maxim of a land without a people when he said in March of 2024 that Gaza's waterfront could be very valuable. The people of Gaza who were being slaughtered at the time seemed invisible to him. Now the paradox in the Israeli example is that there is settler colonialism but no imperialism that follows. Israel is not an imperialist power that is exerting control over a territory for the benefit of a far-off metropole. I mean, sure, there are Zionist arguments for a greater Israel that would include all of the Levant. However, in material fact, Israel can barely manage the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, let alone wanting to conquer and rule over other neighboring countries. So we are left with a lot of settlers colonizing Palestinian land, but no real imperialism, and certainly no Israeli empire. The paradox is resolved if we think about Israel in a greater global context. Even before there was a state of Israel, in the early 20th century, Britain backed the project of Zionism and Jewish migrations. And to this day, Britain, France, and the United States, three of the most imperialist countries in recent memory, support Israel and Zionist colonization. This historical relationship is summed up rather well in what Joe Biden said about the U.S. relationship with Israel.
It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
We're also going to discuss the ironclad commitment, and this is, I'll say this 5,000 times in my career, the ironclad commitment the United States has to Israel based on our principles, our ideas, our values. They're the same values. And I've often said, Mr. President, if there were not an Israel, we'd have to invent one.
These two videos are some 36 years apart, but the imperialist commitment of Biden to Israel has not changed a bit. Here I agree with Rashid Khalidi that it is too late for Biden to read the book. In its origins then, Israel was a European colonial project backed by Western imperialism. The colonizers could not find a place for themselves in the cities and villages of Palestine where Jews, Muslims, and Christians had lived together for centuries. So they had to erect their settlements on top of the ruins of former Palestinian towns. Today, although traditional settler colonialism has gone defunct in most of the world, Israel still practices settler colonialism. Although the Israeli state might claim settlers act without its authorization, there is reciprocity between the Israeli state and settlers. Israel facilitates settler violations of international law, and the settlers are ideologically charged, ready to act as human shields in favor of the colonial project. Israel accuses its enemies, Hamas and Hezbollah, as using the civilian population as shields to hide behind them during combats. Let's reverse this for a moment and ask the Israeli state whether they're projecting their own human shields onto others. The more illegal settlements expand, the more Israel has to use the civilian population as human shields to settle on Palestinian land.
How do we intend to proceed with settling Gaza? We have political support, we have public support, and we have the experience that we have accumulated in 55 years of settling Judea, Samaria, the Golan Heights. We settled all these areas, more than 330 settlements. It wasn't easy. We have accumulated a lot of experience, how to do it politically, how to work with the politicians, how to work with the public, and how to encourage the pioneers to be able to settle in a place that is bare land or difficult place to live in and cope with it.
There are many instances of horrid Israeli settler and state violence against the Palestinians, many of which are documented on video and also by human rights organizations. Israel would try to distance itself from European settler colonialism or project the idea of human shields onto Hamas and Hezbollah. But it is just becoming more and more obvious to an increasing number of people, including in the West, that Zionism is a living example of settler colonialism.